The room was too white, too still, too clean for someone like her to be waking up in. Tessa blinked slowly, her mouth dry and coated with the bitter aftertaste of regret. Her head pulsed with a dull ache just behind her eyes, and as she shifted beneath the covers, she felt something was wrong. The sheets were far too soft, the mattress too expensive, the silence too heavy. Her fingers gripped the fabric on her body and her stomach dropped. It was not her shirt. It was not her room. She was wearing an oversized white dress shirt, crisp and slightly wrinkled like it had been pulled from someone else's closet. The collar hung wide at her shoulders, and as she slowly sat up, the hem slid against her bare legs. She was not wearing anything underneath, not her jeans, not her tank top, nothing but the shirt. Tessa's pulse quickened as she looked around. The bed she sat on was massive, draped in white linens that shimmered faintly in the early morning light. Floor to ceiling windows looked out over a skyline she recognized instantly. Manhattan. She was in a penthouse, a very expensive one. Chrome fixtures, minimalist furniture, the faint scent of eucalyptus and cologne in the air. Her heart pounded harder. She gripped the edge of the duvet and pulled it over her body like armor, trying to slow her breathing. She searched the room with her eyes, but there was no sign of her purse, her phone, or her clothes. Just the stillness of a life that did not belong to her. Her last memory came in fragments. A rooftop party, her best friend's birthday, laughter too loud against the backdrop of city lights. She'd been hesitant to go, but Rachel had insisted. Just come for an hour. You never go out. You need this. She had agreed. She should not have. The music had been loud, the energy too fast. Someone had passed her a shot glass. Then another. Tessa had never drunk before. Not a sip. The burn of tequila had caught her off guard, but she had smiled through it, trying not to show how quickly her head was spinning. She had laughed at the wrong joke, missed the beat of the game, and wandered to the edge of the terrace in search of air. There had been a voice, low, calm, someone asking if she was all right. She remembered eyes the color of smoke, and then nothing, a blank space, no more memories. Just this morning, this room, this shirt. She stood abruptly, but the motion made her dizzy. The floor seemed to shift beneath her feet, and she had to grip the edge of the nightstand to steady herself. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She had to get out, had to find her things, had to figure out what happened. The door to the bedroom creaked open, and she froze. A man stepped in, tall, composed, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hair slightly damp, as if he had just come from the shower. He looked at her without surprise. His face didn't change, neither warmth nor judgment, just a quiet, unreadable calm. Tessa clutched the duvet tighter. "I am so sorry," she said quickly, her voice brittle. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." He raised a hand. "You don't have to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. You passed out. No one else came for you. I didn't know your name, and I wasn't going to leave you there. I brought you back here." He nodded toward the shirt. "That was the closest thing I had to keep you warm. Nothing happened. I made sure of that." Tessa stared at him. She didn't know what to say. The man standing in front of her was Damien Stonehill. She knew his face. Everyone in New York did. Billionaire, CEO, untouchable. And now she was standing barefoot in his bedroom, wearing only his shirt, with no memory of how she had gotten there. Tessa Grant was the kind of girl most people overlooked. She wasn't loud, didn't dress to impress, didn't occupy space with the kind of energy that turned heads. At 23, she had lived her entire life on the edge of other people's stories, never the center of one. She was a virgin, not because of some vow or moral declaration, but because the idea of being that vulnerable with another person had always felt terrifying. There had never been a first kiss, never a second date. She had grown up in a small town outside of Pittsburgh, Raised by a father who worked as a carpenter and a mother who had died too early for Tessa to remember her smile, her world was quiet, functional, predictable. She liked it that way. Safety to her was not a luxury, it was survival. That was why she kept her head down, worked part-time as a library assistant while finishing her degree in environmental design, and spent most nights sketching layouts for community reading spaces she dreamed of building one day. There was never room for chaos, for indulgence, for anything she could not afford to repair if it broke. That night, at the rooftop party, had been a fluke, a crack in her carefully constructed routine. Her roommate, Rachel, had begged her to come. "Please, Tess, you've been buried in thesis work for weeks. This isn't just a party. It's on the roof of the Stonehill Tower. The Stonehill Tower." She had heard of it, of course. Everyone had. It was the architectural crown jewel of Midtown, sleek, impossibly tall, designed to be a symbol of power and presence. And it was owned by the man whose name carried more weight than most entire corporations. Damien Stonehill. She hadn't expected to see him there. She thought people like that existed in magazines and distant boardrooms, not leaning against railings on their own rooftops. But he had been there, alone, dressed in black, silent while others laughed and drank and flaunted their worth. Tessa had noticed him, but she had not stared. She didn't dare, at least not until she had taken that third shot and everything inside her loosened. She remembered stepping outside for air, shoes in hand, hair sticking to the back of her neck. She had leaned forward, too far, nearly tipping, and a hand had reached out, a firm grip at her elbow, a voice asking if she was all right. It had been him, Damien. She remembered the faint concern in his eyes, the steadiness of his presence. The next moments were a blur. She'd laughed. She'd said something dumb, maybe even told him it was her first time drinking. She might have told him more than that. She couldn't remember. Now, standing in his bedroom, dressed in his shirt, all she could feel was the heat of humiliation climbing up her neck. Damien was still watching her, carefully, like a man who had learned to evaluate risk before speaking. His voice, when he spoke again, was calm. "You were alone. You passed out on the rooftop. No one claimed you. No one even noticed you were gone." That last part stung more than she expected. She looked away, biting the inside of her cheek. Why would someone like him care? Why would he bring her here, a complete stranger, and not just call a cab or security? He must have seen the question forming in her mind because he said, "I've seen enough people ignore what they shouldn't. I didn't want to be one of them. That was all." He made it sound simple, like it wasn't strange or intimate or profoundly disorienting to wake up wrapped in his clothes, in his space, in his life. Tessa needed to leave. Her mind screamed it. She didn't belong here. She wasn't the kind of woman who had these kinds of mornings, who became stories whispered about over champagne. She was a scholarship student with 2 roommates and a part-time job shelving books. She had to get out, but her legs still trembled when she tried to move. Damien stepped back, creating space, as if sensing the shift in her. "Your things are in the other room. I'll wait in the kitchen. There's coffee, if you want it." She didn't answer. Couldn't. She just nodded, barely, and watched him disappear down the hallway, footsteps soft, unhurried. The moment he was gone, she exhaled for the first time. Her hands fumbled as she found her clothes folded neatly on a nearby chair, her phone charged and resting on top. No missed calls, no frantic texts, just silence. As she dressed, she tried to collect herself, to rebuild the layers of safety she had always lived inside. But something inside her had already cracked open, not because she was exposed, but because someone had seen her like that, completely undone and not looked away, not taken advantage, not judged. When she stepped into the kitchen 10 minutes later, fully clothed and clutching her phone like a lifeline, Damien looked up from where he stood by the coffee machine. There was no smile, no pretense, just that same unreadable expression. "I'm sorry if I scared you," he said quietly. You didn't, she replied just as soft. You surprised me. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Tessa turned, opened the door, and walked out of the penthouse without another word. But long after she was gone, Damien remained where he stood, still staring at the space she had just occupied. And for the first time in a very long time, he realized he didn't want that silence to stay. The next 3 days passed in a blur, but not because they were busy. Tessa went to class, checked in for her shift at the library, answered emails, did all the things she was supposed to do. But something was off. She kept replaying the night in her mind, trying to stitch together the pieces she had lost. There was no scandal, no damage done, but inside her chest was a tension that hadn't been there before. Something about Damien Stonehill lingered, not just his name or his wealth or the mystery that clung to him like a shadow. It was the way he had looked at her, not like a girl who had stumbled into his world by accident, but like a question he hadn't figured out how to ask yet. She told herself she wouldn't think about him, that she didn't belong in his orbit, that he had already forgotten her. But she was wrong. Because on the 4th day, he showed up. She was shelving a stack of books in the architecture section when she heard someone clear their throat. She turned and almost dropped the entire stack. Damien stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in dark gray, sharp lines, and clean angles, like he had stepped out of a different universe. He held a coffee cup in one hand and something else in the other. You left your sketchbook, he said, holding it up. Her stomach flipped. She had forgotten completely. She had taken it with her to the rooftop party, intending to show Rachel a design she'd been working on. Somehow, in the chaos of the night, it had disappeared from her bag. I figured you might want it back, he said, voice quieter now. And then, after a pause, I also figured I wanted to see if you were okay. Tessa stared at him. He didn't fit in this space. Not the fluorescent lights or the chipped corners of the bookshelves. He was too composed, too controlled, yet something in his eyes looked unsettled, like he hadn't been sleeping well. I'm fine, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Thank you for everything. He nodded, not moving. May I ask you something? She blinked. Okay, why did you come to the edge of the rooftop that night, alone? It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even curiosity. It was something more vulnerable, like he had been there too and was still trying to figure out why. Tessa hesitated. Then she said, I guess I wanted to feel like I was part of something, just for a night. I wanted to know what it felt like not to be invisible. He didn't react, but his silence felt heavier. You weren't invisible, he said finally. Not to me. That made her breath catch, and she hated that it did. She took the sketchbook from his hand, their fingers brushing briefly, and the contact sent a rush of warmth up her arm. Thank you, she said again. She expected him to leave, but he didn't. I'm holding a private showing next week. My team's presenting a new concept design for a sustainable public library on the west side. It's closed, but if you'd like to come, I'll make sure there's space for you. She stared at him. Why? Because your ideas are good. I saw your notes. And because I think you need to see what it looks like when your work can exist outside the page. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. But when he turned and walked away, she stood in the aisle for a long time, her fingers tightening around the edge of her sketchbook, her heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The night of the event, she almost didn't go. She stood in front of her tiny closet for half an hour, trying to choose something that didn't scream out of place. She settled on a black dress, simple and clean, paired with the only pair of heels she owned. When she stepped into the lobby of the Stonehill building, she felt like a fraud. But when she walked through the doors of the gallery space and saw Damien standing across the room, his eyes immediately finding hers, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. He didn't walk over right away. He let her move through the space, explore the models, listened to the presentations, but his gaze never left her, and when he did finally approach, it wasn't as a host or a CEO or a man of power. It was as someone who had waited all evening to breathe again. They spoke quietly, off to the side, their words half lost under the hum of conversation. "You were right," she said softly. "About what?" "It's different when you see it out here. I think I needed that." He nodded. "I think you need more than that. And I want to show you." Tessa looked at him. "You don't even know me." He tilted his head. "Maybe I don't need to, not all at once. Maybe it's enough that I want to." That night, they didn't kiss. He didn't ask to see her again, but when she got home, there was an email waiting for her. It was from his assistant confirming a guest pass to Stonehill's private design lab, an invitation to work, to create, to collaborate, not to date, not to flirt, but to be something more than invisible. Tessa accepted the invitation. One afternoon, a week turned into 2. Damien wasn't always there, but when he was, he watched her work from across the room. Quiet, respectful, not touching, not pressing. But something was building. Each moment between them tightened with tension, with the kind of intimacy that had nothing to do with touch and everything to do with presence. He asked about her projects. She asked about his childhood. He told her he hated the press, hated being treated like an idea instead of a man. She told him she hated feeling like she had to prove her worth to be in any room. He listened. She listened. They were learning each other one piece at a time. Then came the day he found her in the empty studio, asleep on the floor, beside her sketchpad, her hair falling across her face, her hand still clutching a pencil. He didn't wake her. He sat beside her for nearly an hour, watching the rise and fall of her breath, wondering when the silence had stopped feeling empty and started feeling like home. He didn't touch her. He just stayed. Later, when she stirred and blinked up at him, confused and half asleep, he said quietly, "I don't want to scare you, but I think I've started waiting for you in ways I can't explain." She looked at him, wide-eyed, her mouth parting as if to speak, but she didn't. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. No words, no declarations, just skin on skin, and the quiet truth that something real was already unfolding. It wasn't supposed to go this far. That was what Damien told himself every time he saw her enter the studio, every time her eyes met his across the conference room, every time she left, and he found himself replaying everything she'd said. Tessa had begun to occupy the quiet parts of his world, the parts he thought were too cold for anyone to reach. She never asked him for more, never pushed, never presumed, but he felt the shift. He saw it in the way his team looked at her now, not as an intern or an assistant, but as a piece of something they didn't understand yet, but knew was important to him. He didn't care, not about the looks, not about the murmurs. What he cared about was the way she softened his day just by being in it. One afternoon, he found her alone on the rooftop garden above the design floor. She was curled up on the bench, sketchpad open, her pencil moving in small, sure strokes. He didn't speak at first, just stood a few feet away, watching her draw. When she noticed him, she didn't startle. She just smiled, small and tired. "I come up here when I need to breathe," she said. "It's quieter than the city." He nodded and sat beside her. "What are you working on?" She turned the sketchpad toward him. It was a design subtle, clean lines, soft curves, a community library, tucked between 2 narrow buildings, with natural light flooding through rooftop panels. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's safe," she corrected. "It's the kind of place I would have gone to when I was too scared to be at home." That was the first time he asked her something personal. "What happened?" he asked gently. She looked out at the skyline. "My mom died when I was little. My dad tried, but he worked too much. I raised myself. And when things went wrong, I didn't tell anyone. I learned that silence could be safer than truth. Damien didn't push. He only said, I understand. But something about his tone told her that he did, deeply. What about you? She asked. Where do you go when you need to breathe? He was quiet for a long time. I don't, he said. I just build. I keep moving. If I stop, everything catches up. Tessa looked at him then. That sounds exhausting. It is, he admitted, but it's easier than remembering. A few days later, she asked what he meant. They were walking through Trau, aware me die, Aikal entrei pame, a private gallery after hours, a space filled with architectural models he rarely showed anyone. I was 25 when my father died, he said, heart failure, but it wasn't sudden, it was years of silence and resentment, years of him blaming me for not following his legacy exactly the way he wanted. We hadn't spoken in months. Tessa listened, her breath still. I found out from a business partner, not family, not a friend, a man who wanted to buy his half of the company before the body was even buried. He looked at her. That's when I decided that power would be my shelter. If I owned the room, I wouldn't have to feel what it meant to be left out of it. She touched his arm. Just a gesture. Barely anything. But it made his voice catch. I don't know how to be loved, he said, the words stripped of any armor. And I'm scared that if I let you matter more, I'll ruin it. Tessa didn't have an answer, but she didn't pull away. That night they stayed late in the building. She curled up on the studio couch, her shoes kicked off, and he sat across from her, watching the way she absent-mindedly sketched the curve of the city skyline. You're not like anyone I've ever known, he said. You don't ask for anything, and somehow that makes me want to give you everything. She looked at him. You don't have to give me anything. You just have to be real. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she said, You've been taught to believe that love has to come with conditions, that it's transactional, but it's not. It's terrifying and messy and completely unearned. That's why it's worth it. Later that week, something changed. Damien was scheduled to attend a private fundraiser hosted by his board's oldest and most traditional partner. It wasn't just a social event, it was political, strategic. Everyone who mattered in his world would be there. He didn't want to go, but pressure mounted. He received calls, reminders, a nudge from his legal team, and then the final push and arranged introduction to Evelyn Astor, daughter of a powerful East Coast family, heiress, connected, perfectly poised. A woman who had grown up in the same circles, attended the same schools, breathed the same air. She'd be a good match, one board member said bluntly. Someone who understands the demands of your position. Someone who fits. Damien said nothing. He didn't attend the fundraiser. Instead, he took a long walk through the city and ended up outside the library where Tessa was working a community shift. She didn't see him at first. She was reading to a group of children, her voice animated, her face lit with purpose. He stood in the back, unnoticed, listening to her, watching the way she gave everything to that moment without asking for anything in return. He realized then what he had to do. The next day, he declined the Astor introduction officially. It made headlines. Billionaire CEO rejects high society match. There were murmurs about strategy, speculation about motive, but he didn't care. For the first time, he wasn't playing the game. That same evening, he showed up at Tessa's apartment, not in a suit, not with an entourage, just himself. He knocked. When she opened the door barefoot and surprised, he said simply, I'm choosing this. You. Not because you fit into my world, but because you remind me there's another one I want to live in. Tessa stared at him, eyes wide. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it for you, he said. I'm saying it for me. I don't want a future that looks good in a press release. I want a future that feels like this, like truth, like breath. She stepped aside and let him in. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't sleep together. But when he held her hand in the quiet of her small living room, surrounded by books and secondhand furniture and the scent of burnt coffee, she realized that love didn't always come wrapped in fairy tales. Sometimes it came as a man who looked like power but touched like vulnerability. And sometimes the most extraordinary thing wasn't the story, it was the fact that he stayed. It had been 2 weeks since Damien stood in Tessa's apartment and told her the truth. 2 weeks since he chose her not as a statement, not as a rebellion, but as a quiet, undeniable fact. During those weeks, their relationship settled into something that felt real, in a way neither of them had ever experienced. There were no grand declarations. There didn't need to be. He called her when he had 5 minutes between meetings just to hear her voice. She dropped off small things at his office, a thermos of tea, a printout of an obscure design she knew he would like. They didn't see each other every day, but when they did, time bent. It wasn't about quantity, it was about presence. He began inviting her into his space more. First the private design floor, then late dinners in the quiet corners of his home, and eventually the rooftop garden that no one else seemed to use but him. They talked about work, fears, dreams. She told him about the nonprofit she wanted to build, how it terrified her. He offered to fund it. She refused. He smiled. That was when he knew she really was different. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It wasn't even infatuation. It was something quieter, deeper, something neither of them had words for, but both felt growing by the day. And it was exactly that intensity, that quiet intimacy, that made the moment of their undoing so inevitable. The first true step beyond the line they had tiptoed around for weeks came late one night. She had spent the evening helping him review designs for a new public atrium he was developing. They were on the floor of his penthouse, surrounded by blueprints and half-empty coffee mugs. Her hair was in a loose braid, and she was wearing one of his oversized sweatshirts because she had spilled tea on hers earlier. He watched her as she bent over the page, pointing to a detail on the south-facing wall. The light caught her face just right, softening her expression, and something inside him cracked. "You don't realize how beautiful you are when you're working," he said, voice lower than usual. She looked up startled, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "I'm covered in ink and I haven't washed my hair since Tuesday." "I know," he said, "and you've never looked more like someone I could fall in love with." She stared at him, eyes wide. For a moment, the air between them held everything: fear, longing, permission. Then she reached for his hand. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he was afraid to startle something fragile. He leaned in just enough to brush her lips with his, and when she didn't pull away, he kissed her fully, gently at first, then deeper, like he had been holding back every word he hadn't yet spoken. She melted into him, her fingers sliding into his hair, anchoring herself to something real. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Every movement from that moment forward was unhurried, full of quiet reverence. He lifted her onto the couch, their bodies never separating, and touched her like she was both sacred and known. She shivered beneath his hands, not from fear, but from the kind of surrender that only happens when you know you are safe. "We don't have to," he whispered against her skin. "We can stop whenever you want." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "I've never wanted anything more." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He nodded, forehead against hers, his breath shaking. He took his time, undressing her like he was unveiling a secret, not taking a prize. She didn't hide. She didn't shrink. For the first time, she let herself be seen fully, without apology. She had never done this before, had never trusted someone with this much of herself. But in that moment, wrapped in Damien's arms, she didn't feel afraid. She felt like herself. They moved together slowly, discovering each other through touch and silence, through gasps and whispered names. When their bodies finally came together, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't cinematic. It was human, raw, and real. She held his face as he moved within her, and he pressed a kiss to her shoulder like a vow. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the couch, the city lights casting quiet gold patterns across their skin. He stroked her hair in silence, and she rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her ear. "I didn't know it could feel like that," she murmured, "like being chosen instead of taken." He kissed the top of her head. "I didn't know I could feel like this at all." But the world outside didn't sleep. The next morning, Damien received a call. His board had scheduled an emergency session. His refusal to consider the Astor family proposal had unsettled some key investors, especially after a tabloid photo surfaced of him and Tessa leaving his building at midnight. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't intimate. It was just a moment, her stepping into a car, his hand on her back, her face turned toward him in soft laughter. But it was enough to spark questions, enough to open the door, enough to draw a line between his world and hers. "You're under scrutiny," his lawyer told him. "If you continue to be seen with her, you'll face questions, doubts. You're building a multi-billion-dollar expansion. Donors don't like unpredictability." He didn't tell Tessa. He didn't want to make her feel like a liability. But she knew something had changed. He became quieter, distracted. He still called, still showed up. But the warmth in his voice had dulled around the edges. One night she confronted him. "You're pulling back," she said. "Why?" He looked at her for a long time, then said, "Because I'm scared they'll use you to hurt me." "You mean they'll use me to hurt your image?" "No," he said quickly. "I mean they'll hurt you, they'll dissect you, they'll twist everything about you to make you look like something you're not." "Then fight them," she said. "Don't run from me." "I'm not running," he replied, but even she didn't believe it. Not entirely. The next morning, he skipped his board meeting. He flew to the foundation headquarters and withdrew his pending negotiation with the Astor Group. He stood before his board and said, "I won't be told who I should love to make the numbers look better. If that means losing a few clients, so be it. I'll build something better." It wasn't a calculated move. It was a risk. And he took it for her. That night, he showed up at her door again, soaked from the rain, no umbrella, no driver, just Damien. "I'm tired of pretending this isn't the most real thing in my life," he said. "I don't care about the fallout. I care about the fact that you make me want to wake up tomorrow with more than just a balance sheet in my chest." She stepped aside, tears in her eyes. "Then don't run again." "Never," he said. And this time when she kissed him, it wasn't hesitation. It was home. They thought that was the hard part. The decision. The declarations. The moment when Damien stood in front of his board and said no to the life they expected of him. But real love doesn't peak in the dramatic choices. It gets tested in the slow unraveling that comes after. For a while, things were good. More than good. They were real. Tessa started coming by the office regularly, not as a guest, but as a presence. Damien cleared a desk for her in his private studio. She worked quietly, sometimes on her own sketches, sometimes just reading or helping him review design drafts. They didn't pretend she was a consultant or a client. They didn't need titles. They were building something together, something softer than business and stronger than words. He called her sunshine when he was exhausted. She called him ridiculous when he got too serious. He stopped working after midnight. She started sleeping better. It felt like peace. But peace, when you're not used to it, can feel like walking on ice. The cracks don't show until you're already slipping. The press quieted for a while, but the silence didn't last. A new article dropped, subtle in tone but sharp in implication. It wasn't about scandal or sex, it was about stability. A trusted business magazine published a profile questioning Damien's recent decisions, pulling out of the Astor merger, restructuring key partnerships, making what the author called emotionally driven choices inconsistent with his professional legacy. The piece wasn't cruel, that made it worse. It was calculated, dignified, and full of quiet contempt for the idea that someone like him could be undone by someone like her. Tessa read the article in the break room of the community center, where she still volunteered once a week. The photo of Damien was flattering, taken from a recent charity gala, but the caption beneath it stung. From boardroom beast to unpredictable partner, has love softened the CEO's grip? She didn't cry. She didn't even tell him she saw it. But that night, she didn't sleep beside him. She stayed at her own place, made up an excuse about early meetings. He didn't push. But he knew. The distance between them wasn't about lack of love. It was about fear. And for someone like Tessa, fear had never been passive. It always had consequences. A few days later, she started canceling plans. Just small things. At first, a coffee run, a visit to the rooftop. Then she stopped coming to the office. "Just a lot on my plate," she said when he called. "I'm fine." He offered to come over. She said no. "I need some space to think," she told him. "About what?" he asked. "About who I am when I'm not your someone." The silence that followed was heavy, not angry, not cold, just full of the kind of ache that comes from two people who don't want to drift apart, but don't know how to hold on without breaking each other. For a week, they didn't talk. Damien threw himself into work like an addict. Meetings, site visits, pitch decks. He stopped sleeping again. The penthouse lights stayed on past 3 a.m. His assistant noticed. His team noticed. Blake noticed. "You're not fine," Blake said one morning. "You can't build a future with someone and then disappear the second things get hard." "She left," Damien said flatly. "Maybe because she didn't think she had a place here anymore." That sentence hit him harder than he expected, because somewhere in the rush of declarations and decisions, he had forgotten that love doesn't erase self-doubt. It exposes it. Tessa had spent her entire life learning how to survive without help. Now she had to learn how to survive with it, and Damien had to let go of control to let her choose him freely. So he didn't chase her, but he didn't retreat either. Instead, he sent her a message every night. No pressure, no guilt, just one sentence. The first night, "I'm still here." The second, "I miss your laugh when I say something that isn't funny." The third, "I saved your desk. Your pencils are exactly where you left them." She didn't reply, but she read every word. She started sketching again. Late at night, when she couldn't sleep, she filled her notebook with lines she didn't know the meaning of. She drew him once, not his face, just his hands. Strong, open, reaching but never grabbing. On the 8th night, she left her apartment and walked the 8 blocks to his building. The doorman let her up without a word. When the elevator opened into the penthouse, Damien was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, barefoot, making tea. He looked up and didn't speak. She held out the sketchbook. "I didn't leave because I stopped caring," she said. "I left because I needed to know if I could still breathe without you." "And?" he asked. "I can," she whispered. "But I don't want to." He stepped toward her slowly. "You don't have to prove anything, Tessa. Not to me, not to them, not even to yourself." She shook her head. "But I want to. I want to stay, not just when it's easy." He nodded. "Then stay." She dropped the bag she was carrying. "But I need one thing from you," she added. "No more protecting me by deciding things for me. If there's pressure, if there's fallout, I want to face it with you. Don't shut me out to shield me. Let me choose." "Okay," he said. "Then here's my choice. I want you in every room, even the ones that weren't designed for you. Especially those." She stepped into his arms, and this time there was no fear, just warmth, just decision. They didn't fix everything that night, but they started. Together. In the days that followed, Damien began including her in decisions that affected her. He invited her to a stakeholder meeting not as decoration, but as a speaker. She talked about her vision for accessible design, for projects that served people, not just profit. At first, the room was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then another. By the end, people weren't questioning her presence. They were asking when she'd speak again. The press continued, but the tone shifted. The same magazine that had doubted Damien ran a new piece titled, "The CEO Who Listened Why Human, Centered Design Might Be the Future." Tessa's name wasn't in the headline, but her fingerprint was everywhere. Damien didn't give another dramatic speech. He didn't make a statement. He just kept showing up. For her. With her. And slowly, the noise faded. Not completely, but enough. One evening, as they stood in the rooftop garden, watching the sky melt into gold, Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this the night you left," he said. "Didn't send it. Didn't think I should." "Read it," she said. He unfolded it. "You changed the way I breathe. You made me stop looking at numbers and start listening to silence. If I lose everything else, but still have you, I think that might be enough." Tessa smiled, tears slipping down her cheek. "It is." They stood in the quiet, wrapped in something stronger than passion. Love born not from a perfect beginning, but from the decision to stay through the fire. And in that fire, they had become something unbreakable. It was 6 months later when the world seemed to finally stop watching. No more headlines, no more boardroom whispers. The foundation Damien had built continued to thrive, but something had changed in how he led. He paused more, listened longer. He said no to 3 international partnerships, not because they weren't profitable, but because they didn't align with the values he and Tessa had come to believe in. He said yes to things that made less financial sense, but carried more human weight. A community arts center, a vocational design program for underfunded schools. Tessa helped him shape them all. She never asked for credit. He never needed to give her any. Everyone knew. She had become more than his partner. She was his compass. Tessa didn't leave her roots behind. She kept her old apartment for a while, even though she spent most nights at Damien's place. She still worked at the community center on Tuesdays, still brought her own coffee to meetings because she hated office brews. But she stood taller now. Her sketches had been picked up by a publisher for a small design book focused on human architecture. A phrase Damien insisted she trademark. When it launched, he didn't throw her a lavish party. He took her to the tiny diner she once told him felt like home. Over burnt toast and cold tea, she whispered, "This life still feels borrowed sometimes." Damien looked at her across the table and said, "Then I'll keep reminding you it's yours." One evening, as they walked home through the city that had tried to break them, Tessa paused in front of the building where it all began, the penthouse, where she woke up wearing only his shirt. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Do you think we would have found each other if that night hadn't happened?" Damien stepped closer. "I think we were always going to find each other. That night just made us look sooner." She smiled. "It's funny. It started with a dare, a bottle too many, a mistake maybe." He nodded. "No, it started with a girl who'd never been kissed, getting drunk for the first time, trying to feel alive." She looked at him, "and ended with me finding a place I never thought I deserved." He took her hand. "That's the thing no one tells you about love. You don't earn it. You choose it, and then you keep choosing it every day after." They didn't get engaged that year. They didn't post photos or hold press interviews. They just built a life, moment by moment, the way real things are built. Sometimes Damien still woke up before dawn and watched her sleep, her face relaxed, her breath soft. Sometimes she caught him looking and whispered, "Still here?" And he'd smile and say, "Always." They had arguments, about furniture, about schedule clashes, about who forgot to buy groceries. But even in their worst moments, they never walked out of the room. They never let the silence grow too long. They had learned that staying didn't mean perfection. It meant willingness. It meant remembering that love isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to keep showing up. One morning, Tessa found a note taped inside her sketchbook. Damien's handwriting, a little messy, a little rushed. It said, "You weren't the plan, but you are the reason I finally stopped pretending I needed one." And that became their truth. Love didn't come in a storm. It came in a mistake, a slip, a kiss, a shirt too big on a girl too new to love. And somehow, through all the chaos, through the fears, through the pressure to become something more acceptable, they had become something real. Because in the end, love doesn't need to be loud, it only needs to be true.